So in our takeaways from Monday Night Football, to finish out week number 2, are there any glaring issues that we think will plague either organization, Atlanta or Philadelphia, for the remainder of 2024? Let's start with the Falcons from a positive perspective, Joe. They lost game number 1. Kirk Cousins' Atlanta debut. They were the odds-on favorites entering the year in the NFC South at minus 140. Expected to win the division rather easily, be a double-digit team. An offense that was supposed to be prolific. Then the 36-year-old quarterback in his first year with a new team coming off a torn Achilles did not look good week 1. The offense put up 10 points against the Steelers. They lost outright at home as a 4.5-point favorite. And they were booked as a 5.5-point favorite on the road against an Eagles team that had the second best price entering last night to win the NFC. It seemed as though the Falcons were about to start in a winless hole, 0-2, where the Saints and the Bucs had surprised some and looked highly impressive in the opening 2 weekends, starting 2-0. And then the final minute and 30 seconds of the game happened. Atlanta comes from behind to steal a victory on the road in Philadelphia. How has your vantage point then, Joe, changed for the Falcons after only one night in Philly?
So I got to say, they signed Cousins and Mooney in free agency, and that was kind of their big moves, right, to kind of take this offense to a different level. Well, we all know under Arthur Smith, they wanted to be a run-first offense. The problem was once you took the run away from them, they had no quarterback. They had nothing else to lean back on. When you look at how they ran that offense last night, that is the Atlanta Falcons. That's exactly what they have been trying to do for the last 3 years. They rushed for 152 yards. Bijan Robinson, why they went out and drafted him so high, 97 yards, 14 carries. Algiers was also added 53 on 9 carries. And that is why you went out and signed Kirk Cousins. That is who this Atlanta team is. Run the ball effectively, force defenses to stop the run, and allow that to open up things downfield for Mooney and others. That is a good, very good offense there with Atlanta, the best we've seen them have in a while.
Troy Aikman discussed it on the broadcast. This is a great run-blocking offensive line that prides themselves on doing that as a unit. They were just trailing from the very start against a stout Steelers team in week 1. Never really got the opportunity to put that on display. And you're right with Bijan Robinson. 122 scrimmage yards yesterday, 14 carries for 97 yards, well over his rushing plus receiving yards prop of 102 and a hook. Same story for Saquon Barkley, who had a $116 in terms of his scrimmage yards as well, 95 on the ground, 21 through the receiving game as well. But the costly drop on that final offensive possession for Philadelphia will stick in the craw. He should have had a touchdown, was just down inches prior to the goal line, so the tush-push allowed Jalen Hurts to find the end zone. Hurts 85 yards on the ground. And a lot has been made of Kirk Cousins in primetime. Now, after the victory last night, he's 13-20 straight up in his career. He's 4-10 in Monday Night Football specifically. But as we said, Joe, and I thought it was a great point, in 2022 with the Vikings leading Minnesota to an NFC North championship, he had 8 game-winning drives that led the National Football League. And he was the orchestrator of it all in those 65 seconds to bring Atlanta down the field and to find Drake London for that game-winning score. And part of what Atlanta did last night, they only allowed 1 sack to their hobbled Kirk Cousins, who still does not look 100% healthy, but better last night. They had a $152 on the ground, 5.4 yards per pop. The Eagles allowed 163 yards against the Packers in Sao Paulo. Okay, field conditions weren't great. People were slipping and sliding all Friday night long in that Brazilian opener. But still nearly 8 yards per carry for Green Bay. The Eagles had the second worst passing defense in the NFL a season ago, Joe. The rushing defense not off to a great start, 8th worst around the National Football League. And for me, that could be the issue for Philly moving forward.
6.7 yards a rush. That is dead last in the NFL when it comes to rushing defense. It's very hard to win games if you are giving up nearly 7 yards every time they run the ball, and that is what the Eagles defense has done through 2 games. That's where I need to see the improvement. I think the offense will be fine, but that defense better show us something over the next couple of weeks here, Ben.
The Birds still the favorites at minus 140 to win the NFC East. We know the curse or the trend, whatever you want to call it. No repeat champion since '04. It is the only division of the 8 in football, that being the NFC East, without an unbeaten, perfect 2-0 team after 2 weeks. Plenty more around the NFL following week 2 next. Last night was a big victory for the Atlanta Falcons, coming back when everybody thought they were about to start 0-2 in the NFC South to win outright as a 5.5-point underdog in Philadelphia over the Eagles. If they had started out winless, they would be at the bottom of the NFC South, looking up at the Saints and the Bucs, both off to a perfect unbeaten 2-0 start, despite being the odds-on favorites to win the division. The Saints are still the favorites following week 2. The Bucs still have a slightly better price than that of the Dirty Birds, also following week 2, but at least they're not in the cellar of the division alongside the Carolina Panthers. A shocking move yesterday and a huge development in Charlotte. After only 2 weeks, the number 1 overall selection from 2023, Bryce Young, is now going to be on the bench. Andy Dalton is the new starting quarterback in Carolina. You send the number 1 overall pick to the bench, and you elevate the veteran Dalton to become your starting quarterback. The Panthers, a 5.5-point road underdog in Las Vegas for week number 3. A disastrous, winless 0-2 start for Carolina, Joe, after being the worst team in the National Football League a season ago at 2-15. What was your reaction to Dave Canales' decision to bench Bryce Young yesterday?
Am I shocked that they did it? No. Am I shocked maybe they did it after 2 games? From the outside looking in, Ben, it may seem like, what are you guys doing here? Isn't this your franchise quarterback? Aren't you, ride or die with him? When you look at it, Ben, through 2 starts this year, Bryce Young is the one quarterback that has faced the least amount of pressure of any starting quarterback in the NFL.
Yep.
And yet he's only thrown for 84 yards on 26 pass attempts. And when I tell you most of those pass attempts weren't even close, there is clearly something broken here. And I think if the coach legit thinks that the best thing for this guy to do is kind of sit down, because he's obviously in his own head at this point, Ben. I mean, he's been it since he got into the league. He has been the most scrutinized top draft pick that we've seen in a very, very long time. Mentally, it's got to take its toll. And I think if Canales figures the best thing that can happen is let the vet get in here, get some snaps, let him take the pressure off and kind of regroup, and we'll take it from there. They're not planning on winning a Super Bowl. That was never what was in the cards. But if you're going to lose him mentally, then you got to get him off the field, Ben. You're not going to help this kid if you keep him out there the way you've been doing it.
So that's the interesting component of this all. You can understand from Dave Canales' perspective, and as we heard from ESPN's Adam Schefter, Dave Canales' first big boy decision is what one source told him. GM Dan Morgan probably involved in this as well, but a lot that happens in Carolina comes from the very top in their temperamental owner, David Tepper, who many have speculated is the reason Carolina selected Bryce Young first overall in favor of C.J. Stroud, despite maybe what head coach Frank Reich wanted to do at the time in April of 2023. That will be revisionist history in a documentary, I am sure, at some point. But with that being said, you can understand why a rookie head coach would go and trust a veteran as he is trying to show his team. Listen, I understand. I want confidence in this locker room. I want us to be competitive. I want us to win football games, and Dalton might present Carolina's best opportunity of doing that. I'll tell you this, I'm going to bet the Panthers plus 5.5 on the road in Vegas on Sunday afternoon. It just feels like that spot, of course. But now let's talk about the number 1 overall pick in 2023. Joe, I had no issue with Carolina selecting Bryce Young in favor of C.J. Stroud at the time, despite his stature. He was a Heisman Trophy winning quarterback at Alabama in 2021. He was one of the most successful college QBs we had seen in quite some time. He looks like a shell of his former self. But Bryce Young in his last 12 games dating back to the middle of his rookie season has thrown for less than 200 yards. 11 of those 12 games, he threw for 84 yards. 84 only against the Bolts on Sunday. He has made 18 career starts. He has 11 touchdowns to only 13 interceptions. He only has thrown for more than 250 yards one single time. It was week 16 last year against Green Bay when he threw for 312 and 2 touchdowns. It was closer than expected, but Carolina still came up on the losing end. All to say, it has been a disaster to start Bryce Young's career in Carolina in the National Football League. So let me ask you about his career. Is it done with the Panthers? Is he going to be a trade piece? Are they moving on from Bryce Young permanently with this move to change quarterbacks entering week 3?
Well, I think as crazy as this is, Ben, his future with Carolina is going to be dependent on what we get from Andy Dalton. Because I think what happens by inserting Dalton is now you're going to figure out, is this a Bryce Young problem, or is this coaching offense and the players they have, are they the problem? Because if Andy Dalton doesn't have any more success than what that offense had with Bryce Young, then we've got to take a step back then and go, is this really a Bryce Young problem, or is this offense Canales put in, is it awful? So I do think at the very least over the next couple of weeks, we're going to learn about, is this a schematic issue? Are these players awful? Or is it Bryce Young? I think that's what Andy Dalton will let us know. And if this offense all of a sudden starts putting up points and starts winning games, then I think that spells the end of Bryce Young in Carolina and maybe the NFL.
And listen, hand up. On our season preview pick 6, I said the Panthers to go over 5.5, expecting better from Bryce Young under the offensive mind that is Dave Canales. Could be a good bet. 6-7 wins, not a playoff team, not a conference or division contender in the NFC South. It's been anything but. And Carolina now has an updated win total of 3.5. And frankly, out of the performances in the first 2 weeks, I'm not sure how they even get there. To go winless, it's a 19-1 price. And, Joe, we talk about this often through the odds from the handicapping perspective. An underdog can be an underdog, that we expect to see improvement and growth year over year if they kept games closer than we maybe expected the previous season or earlier in the campaign. For instance, the Arizona Cardinals last year, an underdog like Carolina, in all 17 games in 2023, they were 9-8 against the spread. They cover week 1 in Buffalo. Of course, they blow out the Rams week number 2. Carolina's been the opposite of that. 4-11-2 ATS as an underdog in all 17 games last season. 0-2 against the spread, and in a large way this year in 2024. So you just mentioned it. Bryce Young's future could be determined by the results that the Red Rocket, Andy Dalton, puts on the gridiron. Will it look better from the very start, week 3 in Las Vegas?
Well, the market certainly thought so, Ben, because you had mentioned it. That was 6.5. It's now 5.5. Once the news came out, you know what also got steamed? The total. The total was in the 30s. I think we're at the 41 and a half right now. I think it was 38 and a half. So the minute that Bryce Young was pulled, the market was like, hell yeah, give me a Panthers offense with the Red Rocket and give me the over in points. There are some very winnable games coming up, Ben, on their schedule. So again, I think the future of Bryce Young depends on what this team does over the next few weeks.
Yeah, we shall see. Listen, it is not a good situation in Carolina. When you look at the odds for the Panthers to win a Super Bowl, they have the longest price by more than $200. They are 700 to 1 right now. The Broncos have the second longest number at 500 to 1. It is not an optimistic picture for Carolina, for Bryce Young, frankly, even Andy Dalton entering week number 3. Other big news, mainly injury related, around the National Football League following 2 weeks. Next. Part of the sad reality of the National Football League, your season outlook and your offseason expectations can be derailed only 2 weeks into the NFL season. Carolina makes the change at quarterback. Bryce Young now on the bench. Andy Dalton, the starter. Is it enough for a team that's win total has dropped by 2 from 5.5 before the year got started now to a live 3.5 to maybe find some more winning ways in Charlotte? They've got 2 victories since the beginning of last season. And Joe, entering this year, everybody thought if the Rams could remain healthy with a veteran quarterback, Matthew Stafford, much like they did in 2023, Los Angeles would be right back into the postseason. They've been the opposite of healthy. They have been heavily injured from the very start on the offensive line and in the wide receiver room. Puka Nacua already on the injured reserve, and it seems as though Cooper Kupp might be joining him, exiting the blowout in Arizona on Sunday afternoon with an ankle injury. He is expected to be placed on the IR, as well as DB Josh Johnson III and starting offensive guard Jonah Jackson. It could not be much worse in LA than it is. And frankly, Joe, it's starting to look like the 2022 Super Bowl hangover year following that Lombardi Trophy in 2021.
I mean, it's so unfortunate too, right? Because you don't know how many more years of Matt Stafford you're going to be able to squeeze out there, and you've got the quarterback that you want, but his top 2 targets gone, right? Puka Nacua, you mentioned multiple weeks. Cooper Kupp now, what a shock in a walking boot after getting tackled. We thought they'd be able to weather the Nacua injury because they had Cooper Kupp, and now they don't have either. I think they only had 1 or 2 offensive linemen that actually finished the game that were starters, Jonah Jackson and Kevin Dotson. Everybody else, even the backups to the backup are getting hurt there. Tyler Higbee, by the way, still on the physically unable to perform list. He's rehabbing a torn ACL. It's just, I don't know how the Rams are going to overcome, especially defensively, what we just watched the Cardinals do to them. The Seahawks are significantly improved from a year ago. How did they finish anything other than dead last in this division is beyond me, Ben.
It's really difficult, Joe. You mentioned the offensive line injuries. Rob Havenstein, starting right tackle, hasn't played this year. On the other side, Joe Noteboom started the game against Detroit, did not play last week, maybe is on his way back, but it's disastrous. Again, a 5-12 record in 2022. Matthew Stafford, the main injury. Cooper Kupp on injured reserve. Aaron Donald was even banged up through most of that year as well. Aaron Donald is no longer there. The Rams have the 3rd worst rushing defense in the NFL at this point. They've been getting it handed to them in their first 2 games. And it was supposed to be, hey, at least a home opener, against the San Francisco 49ers on Sunday, but still a home opener inside SoFi Stadium for the first time this year. Does not look overly optimistic. We'll talk about that game and the injuries that are front and center in the main narrative entering Sunday afternoon in the city of Angels. But, Joe, in 2022, with all of the injuries, we saw Baker Mayfield in a Rams uniform in 2022. The Rams were 5-12. It is the worst record ever for a team defending a Super Bowl crown. And sure, we had 1 additional game for the first time of that Super Bowl hangover, but it was the worst Super Bowl hangover we had seen in the history of the National Football League. Every other reigning Super Bowl champ had at least won 6 games. The Rams were just 5-12. So again, the Rams will be at home week 3, winless, looking for their first. Maybe the only good news for the Rams is they're a hefty underdog, and we've seen heavy underdogs this year perform very well. Underdogs of at least 6 points. Now 8-0 against the number following week 2. The Rams are in that category, getting 7.5 against San Francisco. In the 49ers, not exactly your bill of health entering week number 3. Christian McCaffrey on injured reserve, and Deebo Samuel might be joining him. An injured calf that has been reported. Deebo is going to miss at least a few weeks for San Francisco. So the Niners and the Rams, who's even going to be out there on Sunday?
It's a great question, this is usually a pretty good rivalry, Ben, if memory serves me right, over the last couple of years, at least when you had a healthy Stafford anyway. They usually go toe-to-toe, but the best shot for the Rams is, number one, I got to see better defensively than what we got against Arizona. I mean, in the first 7 minutes, you were down 21-0. You had no answer for Marvin Harrison Jr. The game was a blowout from the start, and that's not great. And that has nothing to do with the injuries offensively or anything else. Defensively, they couldn't stop a nosebleed. I think that all these injuries on the offensive line, you are going to get blown out by the 49ers. I don't care in what shape they're in, if you can't stop anybody. And I think defensively, much more concerning for the Rams from what we just saw than anything else right now.
Again, you look at the Rams, third worst rushing defense in the NFL. Only Carolina, who, oh boy, that's going to be tough all year long, regardless of who the QB is, and Indianapolis, who gave up more than 300 to Green Bay this past weekend when Matt LaFleur said, listen, we got Malik Willis. We're establishing the run. Those are the two worst rushing defenses. The Rams have given up $197 per game, 231 in week 2 against Arizona. I know that Deebo Samuel's not going to be there. Brendan Ayuk needs to be better. He's been off to a very slow start after getting paid late in the offseason, right before the year got started. Give me Jordan Morris when the rushing yards props come out for that Sunday afternoon contest. Of course, Miami dealing with some quarterback concerns, the health of Tua Tagovailoa, Skylar Thompson, who has made at least a couple of starts in his NFL career. So the Dolphins are signing former Pro Bowl. We say that with legitimacy, but of course, he wasn't really the Pro Bowl guy. It was Lamar Jackson. Regardless, Pro Bowl quarterback Tyler Huntley, making his way to Miami. A little bit of depth in the quarterback room.
Yeah, can you hear that? The parade outside, Ben, down by me. You hear? I mean, they are celebrating in the streets of no, actually, nobody's celebrating. Yeah. Nobody cares. It's going to be a long season for the Miami Dolphins.
Listen, I don't know about Snoop Huntley and Mike McDaniel's offensive system. It's not exactly the same offensive system that he was good at in Baltimore. Plenty more on the early line. Comes your way next. So we're 2 weeks into this 2024 National Football League regular season. Of course, we have reactions. Of course, we have changed our evaluation in some of the spots for teams around the NFL, but we don't want to overreact, right? We want to be based in what we do here. So we look at the odds and see where the markets have adapted after 2 weeks. The Chiefs remain the short favorites to win Super Bowl 59 as they are off to a perfect and undefeated start, 2-0. As Donnie coined yesterday, Joe, here on the early line, they're 2-0 by a toe in both. Isaiah Likely's being a little bit too far out of the end zone in week number 1 in the season debut, in the toe of Harrison Butker, delivering the 51-yard field goal and game winner for KC because of a pass interference call against Cincinnati on Sunday, plus 490 for the Chiefs. But the story throughout much of the offseason, preseason, training camp, even early in week number 1, was San Francisco being right there neck and neck with Kansas City. In fact, at points in the offseason, San Francisco was the favorite, despite losing to Kansas City in Las Vegas, despite dropping 2 of the previous 5 Super Bowls to KC in the last half decade. Now the San Francisco 49ers back by over $1.50 at plus 650. They're 1-1. They got upset in Minneapolis last week. But I think the reason why we're seeing some negative regression in the market movement for the 49ers, Joe, the injuries to Christian McCaffrey already on the IR, and Deebo Samuel might be joining him, at least missing a few weeks with the calf injury.
Yeah, well, and you can't lose to Sam Darnold, can you? Because that's exactly what you did. And that's a problem here. So, the problem, Ben, that people are going to have is the recency bias when it comes to this stuff. I can assure you that nothing we see in September in all likelihood is going to resemble any of these teams come November. Ben, we see it each and every year. So I wouldn't put a whole lot of stock into anything we're seeing here. But I'll tell you this, and I'll point to the Bills, who's hovering around that 9-1, 10-1 mark here. If that Bills team can be more than just Josh Allen, then I do think that from what I've seen the first couple of weeks from them, it's a different feel for this Bills squad, a team that I've bet on a lot over the last couple of years. If they can be more than just the Josh Allen show, And the same problem I have with Baltimore. I think it's going, unfortunately for them, I think their only option is the Lamar Jackson show. And I think that's a recipe for disaster. But I think if some of these guys step up offensively for Buffalo, they are a real contender this year. And nobody seems to be talking about them like we have in years past.
Now the third best price to win Super Bowl 59 at plus 950. That is notable movement for the Buffalo Bills, the team that entered the season with the third best price to win a Super Bowl championship. That's the Baltimore Ravens. They were 11-1, third best price, the shortest number that was in 4 digits behind Kansas City and San Francisco. That number has moved back by $3. They're winless, 0-2. More damning last week, not being able to close it out, up by double digits, 10 points early in the fourth quarter against the Las Vegas Raiders as an 8.5-point favorite. It was the largest of week 2, then their loss on the road in Arrowhead to the Chiefs week number 1. The Texans were a team, Joe, that entered this year with optimism, 10-1. Now the price on Houston. It was expected that Houston could contend for another AFC South championship, for a conference crown in the AFC. And so far, the Texans are 2-0. They technically haven't covered yet. They won by 2 on the road as a 3.5-point favorite in Indianapolis week number 1. Lost out on a cover by the hook, depending on where you got the line, for Sunday Night Football against Chicago just 2 days ago. But the Texans have been solid once again. Defense looked really good against the Bears, and C.J. Stroud continues to do C.J. Stroud things. He has thrown for more than 230 in both of the first 2 games this year for Houston. 3 touchdowns, 0 interceptions. The guy does not put the football in harm's way. He does not turn the football over. That's a quarterback I want leading a team with postseason promise.
Right. But also at the same time, I think beating the Colts and the Bears, I wouldn't be booking my tickets to the Super Bowl just yet because defensively, this team has not been challenged yet. So I need to see a little bit more from the defense. Listen, I believe in Stroud. I think he's got the weapons. I'm good to go there. But if we're going to take the Texans seriously, it's got to be because the defense shows up on the road against better offenses. We'll see what that turns into.
Yeah, we will, because they gave up 27 to Indianapolis and Anthony Richardson in week number 1 in a game that featured 28 combined points and 5 consecutive touchdown drives at the end of the third quarter through the fourth. 28 combined points in that fourth and final quarter. Let's keep diving through some of these prices here, Joe. In terms of the Super Bowl 59 odds, Detroit upset by Tampa on Sunday in the playoff rematch. 5th best number at 12-1. The Eagles upset last night. The Falcons coming from behind in the final 90 seconds, really in 65 seconds, to steal a victory in Philadelphia. Both teams 12-1, tied for the 5th best number. We talked about the Ravens. The Bengals' price to win a Super Bowl actually grew $1 shorter after the loss to Kansas City on Sunday, because I think Cincy proved they were a little bit better, and they've started 0-2 now, 3 consecutive years. It's a large hole to draw yourself out of. Can the Bengals do it once again, Joe? At least in the last 2 years, 2022 and 2023, they went on to win 4 of their next 5 games after the winless start.
I mean, Ben, going back, it's kind of ridiculous. They've lost 7 straight games in weeks 1 and 2 here now under Zach Taylor. At some point, you got to stop digging yourself a hole here. And, they eventually figure it out. We know that. But if you keep playing with fire, Ben, what happens if you miss the playoffs again this year? I think hot seat very much alive and well here for Zach Taylor and the Bengals here. If you don't turn this thing around and quickly, quite honestly, with a healthy Joe Burrow, healthier than he has been, Ben, in a while, then losing and starting 0-2 again is just, to me, it's unfathomable. I think there's an issue in Cincinnati, and his seat is going to get really hot really quick.
No excuse for it, Joe. We can make sense of the Bengals losing, albeit in the fashion they did, with a bad pass interference call. It was the correct call. It was a critical spot, and that's what sucks for Dejon Anthony, the secondary member for Cincy, who was flagged on that 4th and 16 play. They should have won that game, but they absolutely should have won week number 1 as more than a touchdown favorite at home against the Patriots, who are now 1-0-1 against the spread. That's the inexcusable loss to start 0-2. I believe I heard on Monday Night Countdown yesterday on the ESPN broadcast, Scott Van Pelt saying that only 2 teams out of the last 41 that have started winless 0-2 have made it to the postseason. The Bengals included in 2022. They won 4 of their next 5. They lost a game. Then they won 8 straight, I think, to end out the regular season. 10 straight to play in that AFC Championship game that year in Kansas City once again. But again, it's a very steep hill to climb when you start 0-2. Joe, I do want to talk about some teams not listed on this board. Cowboys 20-1, Jets 22-1. We talked about them far enough. Conference movement in the NFC. The Packers moved back because of the injuries to Jordan Love. But how about the teams out of the NFC South? The Saints up from a 40-1 price to 13-1 now in the conference. And if we're going to talk about New Orleans, we need to talk about Tampa as well. The Buccaneers also now a 16-1 price to win the NFC as well. You put in more stock into the Saints and the Bucs, the 2 probably most surprising and impressive teams to begin this season.
Well, I mean, you know, you can dismiss, I guess, putting up 47 points against Carolina, right? But how do you dismiss what they just did on the road against the Cowboys, man, and dropping 44 points?
Yeah.
Clint Kubiak has got them believing offensively, and they are executing at a high level. They are going to be fun to watch.
Yeah, they certainly are going to be very fun to watch. It's the best offense in the NFL. We'll talk individual races with the MVP and some divisional races next. The individual race for the hardware, the NFL MVP odds updated after week number 2. Like, come on, man. Look at the odds right now, Ranieri. Just don't even look at our faces. Put the odds up on the board. Plus 260 for Patrick Mahomes. Sure, he threw for 290 in the season opener against Baltimore. 1 touchdown. 1 interception, and a costly one that he threw for $155 against the Bengals with 2 tuds and 2 INTs on Sunday. Listen, Patrick Mahomes, who has 2 MVP awards, most recently in 2022, you have voter fatigue working against the guy that has always been at the top of these odds. For a team that we're kind of fatigued by trying to win a Super Bowl, there's no reason Mahomes should be nearly half the price of everybody else in the National Football League at plus 260 following 2 weeks. He hasn't even been all that statistically great by his own ridiculous standards or even by pretty average standards of an MVP contender in the National Football League.
Right. But, you know, the book also knows that everybody is going to paint him like they painted the Brady brush, right? Like, ultimately, they expect Mahomes to be there in the end and get every vote, all the headlines, everything goes his way. It's all, we said we had to do it. How long now with Brady? We had to go 20 years having to deal with this same kind of crap with Brady. And now we just said, well, congratulations. We got another decade and a half of Patrick Mahomes. Get used to it. Always going to be overvalued in any futures market when it comes to player awards. We know this, unfortunately, Ben.
Ranieri, do you know who the 4 quarterbacks are that have thrown for 4 more touchdowns this season? Because I'll tell you, if we're going to use those stats as a way to consider MVP contenders, Derek Carr and Baker Mayfield, each 5 touchdown tosses.
Woo!
Sam Darnold and Kyler Murray, each 4 touchdown tosses. Are they legitimate MVP contenders following only 2 weeks?
Well, if Derek Carr and the Saints, who we both believe in Clint Kubiak and what this offense is doing because of the weapons that they have, if they're going to average 40-some-odd points, 35 or more points a game, then he's very much in the conversation for, because they don't do that without Derek Carr. This isn't the Alvin Kamara show rushing the ball. That's a passing offense and a real one at that, Ben.
So when you look at these awards, of course, you will see on the list that we display only quarterbacks. That makes sense. The last running back, or non-quarterback, I should say, to win the NFL MVP award was Adrian Peterson back in 2012. That is now well over a decade ago. That is 12 winners of the award, all playing quarterbacks since AP. AD, I guess, because we called him all day. And even prior to that, we saw, as I'm looking at it now, 5 consecutive quarterbacks to win the award before Adrian Peterson claimed the hardware in 2012. That's a lot of quarterbacks. That's a lot. That's 16 of the last 17 having won the MVP award. Joe, is there a potential with Saquon Barkley off to a good start despite the drop yesterday to end out the game for Philadelphia? In much the same consideration we gave to Christian McCaffrey a year ago, that we might see a non-quarterback win this award in 2024.
No, because Hurts is going to steal far too many votes in that spot there. So they'll siphon it off one another. But let's we've got 2 games out of Saquon. Let's see if we can keep him healthy for 6 in a row first. Let's do that.
Yeah, the reigning NFL MVP, Lamar Jackson at 28-1, tied for that 9th best price, along with Kyler Murray rounding out this board. Jared Goff has actually fallen off from where these odds were. He's at 35-1 right now. You mentioned Derek Carr, 33-1. Kirk Cousins, 35-1 as well. Baker Mayfield at 30-1, actually a shorter price than both of those other quarterbacks from the NFC South. Baker's been great. Derek Carr's been great. New Orleans, the best scoring offense in the National Football League, 91 points. The Cardinals averaging 34.5 points per game, 28 in the opener, 41 in week 2 against the Rams. That's 69. But the Saints, who have scored 91 points, no other team even has 70 or more at this juncture following 2 weeks. So a substantial advantage for the Saints in terms of scoring output. If you're the quarterback of the best scoring offense, that is often a good place to be. We have often seen Josh Allen, Joe Ranieri, at the top of these MVP markets for many, many a year. He now has the 2nd best price at 5-1 alongside C.J. Stroud. Those are the 3 quarterbacks, all with 3 digits. You got to go all the way to Jalen Hurts at a 12-1 number to get to that 4th best price. So it really looks like a 3-quarterback race as of this moment. You mentioned Buffalo's price to win a Super Bowl and how appealing it is. Josh Allen remains the constant in Western New York for a reshuffled roster this year for Buffalo. And I think the biggest thing, Joe, for Josh Allen is being less turnover prone. That has been his kryptonite. That has been the fair criticism of his play the last few years when Buffalo was expected not to win a division, not to win 12 games, but to actually get to an AFC championship and play for a Lombardi trophy. Is this the year that Josh Allen cleans it up and wins an MVP award?
I do think those are correlated, aren't they, though, Ben? Right? If you're really considering Buffalo to be a Super Bowl contender, then that only happens because Josh Allen plays and takes that next step, right? And you mentioned the turnovers. So far, so good. He's also rushing the ball out of his mind. He could set a lot of records this year. Again, they can't afford just to be the Josh Allen show, but if you like them at this point to actually represent the AFC in the championship with a possibility to win it, how in the world are you not backing him to be the MVP? Those things go hand in hand because eventually he's got to go through you-know-who. So,
That is true. And that's also been the Bills' kryptonite. 3 of the last 4 years being bounced from the playoffs by Kansas City. The last 3 years, an exit in the division round. He did fumble it once, and it was recovered by the Cardinals in week 1. So he's got 1 fumble, 1 turnover, 0 interceptions to 3 touchdowns through the air, 2 more rushing scores. He had 4 total TDs to bring Buffalo all the way back week number 1 over Arizona. Josh Allen has the 3rd best passer rating currently in the National Football League. Only Derek Carr and Baker Mayfield better. Kyler Murray at a 122.9, that 4th best passer rating as well. Plenty more in store here on the early line for you. Some early lines on the early line now. What's one of the greatest things about football season that even as we recap the conclusion of 1 week with a Monday Night Football reaction, set the stage for where the market has moved, we offer up some thoughts, blah, blah, blah. When are we going to get to game breakdowns? We're only 2 days away from football. Thursday night, short week inside MetLife Stadium for Aaron Rodgers and the New York Jets as they host the Patriots, our 2nd consecutive divisional duel on a short week Thursday night football game. On paper, you might be saying to yourselves, all right, 37.5 is the total. The Jets are a near touchdown favorite at home. This game's going to be a clunker like we often see on short week Thursday night football games. I am not so sure, Joe Ranieri. We've got the New England Patriots, who have been far more competitive than I, you, or maybe anybody else in their right mind would have said they were going to be early this season. They went outright as a 7.5-point underdog week number 1 in Cincinnati. They keep it real close in the home debut in Foxborough on Sunday afternoon against Seattle. Seahawks had to take the game to overtime. They kicked a field goal in that extra session, but New England did push as a 3-point closing underdog. That line was 4.5 earlier in the week, 3.5 even early on Sunday morning. New England 1-0-1 against the spread by the final tracker. The Jets, 1-1 against the spread, covering as a 3.5-point road favorite in Nashville on Sunday. But that game was closer than I think a lot of people expected it to be. So with all that said, Joe, what's the early handicap here on the early line for Thursday night football in just over 50 hours time?
The problem is, looking at the injury report yesterday, there isn't a starting offensive lineman or backup offensive lineman that isn't banged up. They were dropping like flies in that Seattle game. And that's an issue, because if you are going to have a bunch of backup offensive linemen on a short week for New England with Jacoby Brissett against that Jets rush and Quinnen Williams and company, we may not get the kind of output that we have seen here in the first couple of weeks from the New England Patriots. But I think a lot of that had to do with Seattle blowing a couple of big defensive possessions there in that game, which gave New England extra points they probably shouldn't have had. Otherwise, that game definitely stays under. The thing that I would be concerned with is that Geno Smith, Jackson Smith, and of course, Metcalf, that's well over 300 yards in the air. They torched that secondary of the New England Patriots. I would imagine this is probably the Garrett Wilson coming out game with Aaron Rodgers. It feels like that is very much a possibility here. But the Jets have been an under machine at home over the last couple of seasons. But I don't even know if you can count that. New England's offensive line injuries concern me about anything with an over. Maybe a Jets team total over is a better way to look at it.
Probably concerning not only keeping Jacoby Brissett upright and what that could mean just overall offensively for the Patriots, but also on the ground. Antonio Gibson, 11 carries for 96 yards against Seattle. A lot of that coming on a long 45-yard run. But, Joe, one of my favorite bets of the weekend was over 16.5 rush attempts for Ramondre Stevenson, knowing that's how New England is going to incorporate their offense. He had 21 carries for 81 yards and a tud against Seattle. They had 185 yards as a team against the Seahawks. If the offensive line is banged up against a Jets defensive front that looked a lot better in the second half against the Titans, they struggled early against Tennessee. Of course, they gave up 32. Probably could have been more than that against San Francisco week number 1. That's an area of concern for a Patriots team that even in the outright win in Cincinnati only scored 16 points. That's the concern for New England. Hunter Henry, huge for the Patriots, by the way, on Sunday. 8 grabs, 12 targets, 109 of the 149 yards Brissett threw for. But Joe's right. Geno Smith, 327 yards in 4 touchdowns. Just a single touchdown, 7.4 yards per carry against New England on Sunday. Garrett Wilson, welcome to the show on Thursday night. Aaron Rodgers has not been tasked with doing all that much, Joe. I think this will be a time, even on a short week, for the offense to open it up for Gang Green.
Yeah, I would expect that big play Aaron Rodgers is going to be available in this game finally. But again, third game in 10 days, Ben? This is interesting.
Yep, it is. Very interesting scheduling logistics for New York to start the year. Monday night in Santa Clara. Short week on the road in Nashville. Home opener, but short week with a 40-year-old quarterback. Hour 3 up next.